Ukraine's sustaining heavy casualties, and it's trying its hardest to, protect its own soldiers. That's why it's not doing the same kind of mad human wave attacks that Russia and the Wagner forces were doing with, conscripts and convicts, sending, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of men to their death to run up against fortified positions. Ukraine isn't doing that. Ukraine is trying very hard to take trenches, trench after trench after trench.
But have been killed in a Russian missile attack on 2 residential buildings in the eastern Ukrainian town of Provosk. It was a double missile attack, the second striking while rescuers were conducting a search operations for victims of the first attack. Let's find out more. Oz Katerji is a conflict journalist in Kyiv, Ukraine, and joins me now. Oz, good evening.
Hello.
Can you just explain a timeline of what happened?
Yeah, so the first missile came in early this morning, and this has been a pattern with Russia for many years in its operations in Syria, where it has used a missile strike, waited until first responders come, and then it strikes again to do a double tap, as it were, to cause maximum damage to civilians and morale. And it appears like this has happened. The exact same pattern has happened today, in which the first missile came in, and then as first responders were coming in, another missile came. So as you said, it was 7 dead earlier. It's gone up to 8 dead now. Dozens of people more injured. So there's a real risk that the numbers could continue to rise.
Yeah, presumably rescue efforts still continuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still going on now, and the information is just coming through. Obviously, I'm in Kiev, so that's in Donetsk. So we're just waiting to hear, from the authorities about, the casualties and how they're doing.
Yeah, what kind of response has there been from the authorities?
Today the response has been pretty strong. Russia was, they said Russia was a terrorist state, according to the Ukrainian government. Ukraine's been very, very angry about Russia's continued strikes on civilian targets, and they're constantly requesting more in the way of air support, air defense, to be able to prevent these attacks. Because Russia is continually striking civilians here, and this has been going on for well over a year and a half.
Give us an idea of the sentiment of the people living in what effectively is, the front line, towns right in the heart of the fighting, and lots of people sort of adamantly saying that we want to live here, and we're not listening to local authorities who are saying you've got to stay away because of how risky it is. What is sort of the sentiment of people living in those areas?
Yeah, so I mean, look, this strike was one thing, but there was another strike on Monday night in Kharkiv, which killed at least 2 people, again on residential buildings. And Kharkiv was, mostly liberated, last year, the tail end of last year. Even though it's still not particularly safe, civilians are still there, and it's still being hit. I think the Ukrainians are a very defiant people, but also, look, a lot of these people can't afford to go other places. A lot of these people, it's in quite rural areas, maybe have cattle to look after, animals. They can't just up and leave. Mm-hmm. So, the elderly, the infirm, these are the kinds of people that get caught up in war. So, while there is this kind of resilience and defiance of spirit in Ukraine, also there are a lot of people who are trapped who can't go other places, and they are really, really vulnerable, easy targets for Russian precision-guided missiles to hit residential buildings with no military value anywhere nearby.
In the midst of these sort of, as you've said, targeted attacks on civilians, Ukraine is really trying to regain territory occupied by Russia. What we're sort of understanding is the counteroffensive that's been going on, 2 months now, has been, I guess they've made gains, but they're not as far-reaching as was hoped.
So, look, I'll say 2 things about that. The first is there's been, some grumbling in Western capitals about how how slowly the offensive is going. But Ukraine requested tanks and jet fighters and long-range missiles. They requested them last year. We're still waiting for the jets to arrive, and Ukraine is fighting a massive 20th century land war without any air advantage, and even fighting against guys who just wear sandals and have AK-47s. No Western government has gone to war without close air support in recent memory. So they're expecting Ukraine to do this incredible task, fighting, the second largest army in the world, and they're expecting them to do that without close air support and without some of the long range missile capabilities that we just haven't sent them yet, and still are sort of umming and ahhing about sending. That's the first thing I'll say. So grumbling about the speed of the offensive when we haven't provided Ukraine the weapons that it's asked for is really not fair on the Ukrainians for a start. The second thing that I'll say is, look, Ukraine's sustaining heavy casualties, and it's trying its hardest to protect its own soldiers. That's why it's not doing the same kind of mad human wave attacks that Russia and the Wagner forces were doing with conscripts and convicts, sending thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of men to their death to run up against fortified positions. Ukraine isn't doing that. Ukraine is trying very hard to take trenches, trench after trench after trench. So look, if a year ago when Ukraine had requested tanks, the tanks had been sent. A year ago, Russia hadn't built, miles and miles and miles of fortified trenches in the occupied territories. So I think there will be some progress over the coming weeks. I don't think it's going to be necessarily as sweeping as Western capitals are hoping for, but really, the message really should be if Western governments want Ukraine to win this war, then they need to give Ukraine the tools it needs to win the war, and they currently still aren't doing that a year and a half into the full-scale invasion.
Oz, thank you very much for your time. Oz Katerji, conflict journalist in Kyiv, Ukraine, clearly painting the Ukrainian perspective and the real frustration, as we've just heard echoed there, for what Ukraine want to be able to move further forward in the counteroffensive. Thank you so much for your time.